I stepped into City Hall just after dawn, the halls eerily silent except for the muffled chatter of officers securing the scene. Councilman Richard Lanning's office was at the end of a long, carpeted corridor, the frosted glass of his door shattered from where someone had forced their way inside. I took a breath, steeling myself for what I was about to see. The body slumped over the mahogany desk was already starting to go cold. Lanning's lifeless eyes stared at a monitor that had gone black, his fingers limp around a pen. On the desk, a ceramic coffee cup sat half full, a smudge of lipstick on the rim. I noted the faint scent of almonds in the air. Cyanide. Poisoned, I muttered, straightening. Officer Ruiz, a young cop with a keen eye, handed me a small evidence bag containing a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, the ink slightly smudged. Drop the bill or pay the price. I glanced at Lanning's monitor, pressing a key to wake it up. A login screen blinked at me. Whatever he'd been working on was locked away behind a password, if it hadn't already been erased. Anything missing? I asked. His assistant, Rachel Holt, said his flash drive isn't here, Ruiz said. She claims he always kept it with him. That drive have anything to do with the new bill he was proposing? Most likely. The bill would have cut funding to several city contracts, pissed off a lot of powerful people. We've got a long list of suspects, detective. I exhaled, rubbing my jaw. The politics of this town were a viper's nest, and Lanning had just stuck his hand in. Rachel Holt was waiting outside the office, her hands wrapped around herself as if trying to ward off a chill. Her brown eyes flickered up at me as I approached. You were the last person to see him alive? I asked. She nodded. I brought him coffee around 7 last night. He was still working when I left. He always stayed late when something big was happening. Did he seem worried? Unusual behavior? More than usual, yes. He said he had something important on that drive, something that could change everything. Did he say what it was? She hesitated. No, but he looked scared. I narrowed my eyes. Rachel's story seemed solid, but there was something about the way she was gripping her arms a little too tightly that put me on edge. People grieve in different ways, but guilt has its own body language. We'll need you to stay available for more questions, I said. And if anything comes to mind, anything at all, let me know. She nodded quickly and left, disappearing down the hall. I turned back to Ruiz. Get a tox report on that coffee, and find out who might have had access to his flash drive. As I stared at Lanning's office, my gut told me this wasn't just a random threat gone too far. Someone had planned this. And the missing flash drive? That was the key to everything. Now I just had to find it before the killer covered their tracks for good. Ruiz nodded and walked off, leaving me alone in the dimly lit corridor. I took another glance at Lanning's office, at the shattered glass and the darkened monitor. Something about this crime scene felt too convenient. Poison was a calculated choice, cold, impersonal. Whoever did this hadn't just wanted Lanning dead. They wanted to send a message. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the councilman's recent statements in the press. The proposed bill had made him a lot of enemies, but one name stood out, Senator Andrew Markham. A longtime player in the city's political machine, Markham had fiercely opposed Lanning's reforms. If the missing flash drive contained damaging information, Markham had plenty of reason to want it gone. But first, I needed to know more about Rachel Holt. Back at the precinct, I dug into her records. Clean history. No criminal background. A steady rise from intern to assistant over the past 5 years. No obvious ties to Markham or anyone else who might benefit from Lanning's death. But that didn't mean she was innocent. I pulled up the security footage from City Hall the night before. The footage showed Rachel leaving the building at 7:30 p.m., as she had claimed. But something else caught my eye. A man in a dark coat lingering near the entrance just minutes later. He didn't enter the office, but he paced back and forth, checking his phone, before disappearing out of view. I forwarded the clip to Ruiz. See if we can get an ID on this guy. Then, I checked the tox report. The coffee was laced with cyanide, just as I suspected. But there was something else, an unusual sedative mixed in, one that wasn't commonly used. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure Lanning didn't see this coming. Rachel was the one who brought him the coffee. That put her at the top of my list. But was she acting alone? I decided it was time for another conversation with her. When I arrived at her apartment, she was visibly shaken. Detective, what's going on? I held up my phone, showing her the footage. Who's the man outside City Hall last night? Do you recognize him? Her face went pale, and her fingers tightened on the edge of the door. I don't know. Rachel, don't lie to me. Lanning trusted you. If you know something, now is the time to talk. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't want this to happen. I never wanted him to get hurt. I stepped inside, lowering my voice. But you knew it would, didn't you? She swallowed hard, then nodded. They told me it was just supposed to scare him. I swear, detective, I didn't know they were going to kill him. Who's they? Her lips trembled before she whispered the name I had suspected all along. Senator Markham's people. The pieces were falling into place. Now I just had to prove it. Rachel Holt sat across from me in the interrogation room, her hands shaking as she gripped a paper cup of stale precinct coffee. The weight of her confession pressed down on her, but she hadn't given me enough. Not yet. Rachel, listen to me. You're scared, I get that. But if you want out of this, you need to give me more. Who did Markham send to handle Lanning? She hesitated, then whispered, David Connors. That name hit like a gut punch. Connors was a fixer, ex-military, now a ghost working for people like Markham when things got messy. If he was involved, Lanning never stood a chance. Ruiz knocked on the door and slipped inside, his face tight with urgency. Got something. A street cam caught Connors near City Hall last night. And get this, IT recovered partial data from Lanning's hard drive. He handed me a printout. Take a look. I scanned the page. It was a list of offshore accounts tied to city contracts, each linked to shell companies. Millions of dollars funneled into slush funds. Markham wasn't just protecting his political interests. He was running a full-scale corruption ring. Rachel let out a sharp breath. That's what he found, isn't it? That's why they killed him. I nodded. And if we don't act fast, you might be next. We moved quickly. By noon, the DA had issued a warrant for Connors. By evening, we caught him trying to slip out of town with a fake passport and a duffel bag full of cash. In interrogation, he was all smirks and silence, until we put the evidence in front of him. The offshore accounts, the security footage, the tox report. Piece by piece, his confidence cracked. Markham gave the order, didn't he? I pressed. Connors leaned back, exhaling slowly. I don't say a word without a deal. The DA would handle that part, but by the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, I was already dialing a number I knew by heart. Markham answered on the second ring. Detective Cole. His voice was smooth, controlled. To what do I owe the pleasure? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Thought you should know, we found the flash drive. And Connors? He's ready to talk. A pause. Then, cool as ever, Markham said, Careful, detective. You don't know who you're playing with. I leaned back in my chair. Neither do you. I hung up, watching the city lights flicker outside my window. Markham wasn't in cuffs yet, but his empire was crumbling. And me? I had a feeling this case was far from over. But for now, at least, Richard Lanning had justice. And that was enough.